said also a couple of times today that the supply side should fix itself. And I note that one of the mandates of the RBA is price stability, currency stability. Ultimately, inflation is a product of supply and demand.
Yep.
And I'll just pick up on one of your most recent comments today was you're not in the business of supplying credit, you'll leave that to the private market. But yet, that's exactly what central banks do. You give credit to the banks, and in particular the Federal Reserve and the ECB, have printed trillions of dollars in the last 2 decades, and then they hand it out to the prime banks and let the prime banks spray it around. What's wrong with using that Section 36 of the Banking Act to actually let governments lend to governments and not waste money on a margin that the private banks always use? I mean, surely it's our own currency. Why are we then paying private banks that net interest margin to use our own currency, or even worse, use foreign currency and pay interest on foreign currency when we have the ability to issue credit in a responsible way? So I'm not talking about lending to private markets here or the private sector. I'm talking about government debt, so things like state debt, right? Why does the state, you take the Belt Road, for example, with the Victorian government, why do they have to borrow from China when they should be borrowing from our own central bank?
Well, there are a few issues there. Australian governments don't borrow from the banks, so they're not paying a bank margin.
They buy bonds on...
Well, they pay a market rate of interest.
Exactly,
on
which
the
includes a
bonds,
margin.
They have to pay interest. They pay the market rate of interest. Back to the same kind of response to Senator McKim's question, I think it would be a retrograde step for the Reserve Bank to be sitting here making decisions about allocation of funding. We could do climate change, we could do infrastructure, we could do advanced manufacturing, we could do building hospitals, and then the Reserve Bank becomes the arbiter of who gets credit in the economy. The better way of doing it is for the governments to make decisions about where they want to spend money and then to raise the money in the capital markets. There's no free lunch.
But there is a margin. Banks have a net interest margin. I've been a treasury accountant in a bank. I know how it works. Okay, and I agree with you. It's not up to the RBA on what decisions they make. But if Parliament decides that on essential infrastructure like bridges, roads that have an asset that generates a return, that the RBA can lend in or issue credit within an infrastructure bank. I mean, companies go out and issue shares. They don't always go and issue new equity. They don't always go out and borrow money. Yep. Right? If we've got an increasing population here that's increasing demand, we need to increase the volume of supply. And the 1937 Banking Royal Commission actually said central banks should control the volume of money in the system and or have an oversight to it. And you're completely washing your hands of that. And to me, it's absurd that a government doesn't control, it just wants to outsource money supply to foreign banks.
The Australian government doesn't outsource money supply. We control the money supply. But
you control qualitative easing.
You just think kind of the world where you kind of accepted your proposition, the government wants to spend money and the Reserve Bank just gives it the money.
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, that's
not what I said.
Senator,
please don't put words in my mouth.
Senator Rennick, there's been quite a lot in your questions, and I think the Governor is attempting to answer them, so
sure.
we might just let him give an answer for a moment.
If we were to, let's say in this hypothetical world, we would lend the government money, then we would have to charge an interest rate, and we'd charge the market interest rate. It would be the same as we were lending 10 years, we'd charge the government the 10-year bond rate. So it wouldn't lower the government's cost of financing, it would just inject the central bank into the whole process. And if we decided to lend to the government at a below market interest rate, then we're providing a subsidy. And I don't think that's appropriate. And which projects would we provide the subsidy for? It's better for the government to go to the market and to borrow. There's no way that we can provide cheaper funding in the end. It's not the job of the central bank to subsidise government finance. If you do that, you end up with inflation and resource allocation.
You're subsidising private banks.
You've got one final question.
Yeah. Well, that's a bit hypocritical coming from you because you're subsidising private banks. You've just lent $188 billion to our private banks here in Australia at 0.15% and said to them, you don't have to repay it until 2024.
Yeah.
So they are creaming it. They're creaming billions of dollars. So you're a hypocrite when you say that.
Senator Rennick, that's not appropriate.
Okay, well, withdraw that comment.
Do you have a question?
That conflicts with what you've just said.
Do you have a question?
The question is that why do you then think it's okay to subsidise private banks? And that's what happens with the Federal Reserve. They lend
have a
out to
question?
prime banks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is it okay then for the RBA to subsidise private banks and not use quantitative easing, which is what effectively central banks in other countries do? And constructive
Well,
means.
we did undertake quantitative easing. We bought a couple of $100 billion of bonds. And during the pandemic, we thought the right thing to do was to pass low cost of funding to banks so that they would pass it on to their customers.
So you're
And
subsidising banks,
we were
that's
not,
exactly my point.
We were not involved in credit allocation at all. We were
And I don't think you
central
should be.
bank- Yeah, no, we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So, we wanted during the pandemic, as part of our insurance policy, to make sure that interest rates for borrowers were as low as they could possibly be to give people extra cash flow.
So you accept
that
you
was-
subsidise private
There's
banks?
no
That was
further-
for a period-
there's
for a
no-
period- for-
no
for
further
A short
questions.
period there during the pandemic, we thought that was the right thing to
Yeah.
do.
So you
We're
can
not
subsidise
doing-
private banks
we're
but not the taxpayer. Thank
You
you.
know-
I'll take that as a comment. Thanks.
Authorised G. Rennick, LNP Chermside.